AIM-listed Synairgen is a drug discovery and development company spun out of academia, Southampton University to be precise. It's focused primarily on severe asthma and pulmonary disease. It's seen its shares rise more than 10 times this year, 1,100% plus between the lows and the highs. You can see here it's off the highs, but remains of interest in the current environment with the spread of the current strain of coronavirus, COVID-19. Richard Marsden is Chief Executive of Synairgen, and he joins us now on the line. Richard, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for your time. Before we look at the reasons behind the share price move since COVID-19 and the opportunities as a company you see in this area, best to look at what Synairgen did to great effect before COVID-19. Just explain a bit more about the company.
Yeah, so we are an academic spin-out company, and we've pretty much commercialized the line of research that the founding academics were pursuing, albeit from an academic perspective. They had developed some quite intricate models of lung tissue. So we're a respiratory company, and those models were dependent on volunteers coming along and being subjected to something called a bronchoscopy, where you put a tube down into the lungs of patients and collect cells from the lining of the lungs. And with those cells, they were able to generate these models of disease, asthma, COPD, which is chronic bronchitis and emphysema, and other diseases, but also from volunteers without those lung diseases. So it kind of lets you do a mini clinical trial in the lab. Now, once you've got the models up and running, which they had done as academics, it enabled us to challenge those models with the very things that cause those patients problems. Now, people obviously think about asthma, and they think about allergies and cold weather and exercise and things like that. And similarly with COPD, they think about cigarette smoke, pollution and bacteria. But through all of this, you get viruses. So apart from having generated these models, they were very keen to understand why so many of their patients became ill every winter because of these otherwise benign cold and flu viruses. So with the models, they were able to infect the cells with rhinovirus, which is one of the common cold viruses, and influenza viruses, and then flush out differences between the patients who have got asthma or COPD and control patients, people, younger people, older people. And they found there were some quite marked differences. And one of the major differences was that the asthmatic and COPD cells mounted a poor innate immune response. And this is our first line of defense when a virus comes along. It's what precedes the production of antibodies, which will ultimately clear up the virus. And behind this poor innate immune response was a poor production of something called interferon beta. And that's a protein that we all make when we get cold infections. And if you don't make enough of it, logic would have it that you'd be vulnerable to these infections. So they were delighted that they'd made this observation. The company had just been set up, and it became our first program. And it's been the program we have pursued for over 15 years now. Other things have come and gone. Some things just haven't worked. Some things we've partnered, particularly with an Australian company called Pharmaxis. But this interferon beta program is pretty much what we are about today. And what we're doing with this drug is delivering it via aerosol into the lungs of people. We've worked in asthma, we've worked in COPD, but when the coronavirus came along earlier this year, it was our call to action, and we conducted a clinical trial in the hospital setting with results coming out in July.
Well, let's pick up on that point, because I'm really interested in this, of course, and this does bring about a sense of urgency. I know that perhaps maybe you hadn't had necessarily prior to COVID-19. SNG001. Now, I love it that biotech and pharma companies come through with these wonderful names for these things in testing, but that's what we call it at the moment. 2 trials, I understand, home and hospital. Explain what's going on and how far down the path you are.
Yeah, so I guess just a tiny bit of a recap. I'm going to go back 3 or 4 months here, but when the virus first emerged in Wuhan, we tried to engage with Chinese researchers, but there were some logistical challenges about trying to set up a trial in China quickly. Basically, we've got this drug which could be considered as a broad spectrum antiviral, and we could see these patients were becoming very ill in respect of their lower respiratory tract or lung symptoms. So we tried, couldn't get it going in China. When the virus arrived in Italy in a big way in sort of late February, March, we were engaged with a team of researchers in Italy, and they went from being able to communicate and have good conference calls and email exchanges to overwhelmed within about 6 or 7 days. So we didn't get the trial up and running in Italy. We gambled that the virus would come to the UK and set about writing a protocol, submitting it to the MHRA and the ethics committees to get approval. We pretty much did that in a 3 or 4 week period and got all the approvals. And at about the same time we were getting the approvals, the virus was here. And what we've been able to do in a hospital environment is dose 100 patients with either placebo or SNG001, which is this special formulation for inhalation of interferon beta. And the results from this trial come out in July. And what we were targeting was patients who were in hospital. They were there because the virus has hit their chest. So we were avoiding people who are, perhaps very, very frail, and it wouldn't have taken much to make them extremely ill. So we wanted patients who could recover, as I said, who were there primarily because the virus has hit their chest very hard and they're finding it very difficult to breathe, either with room air or on oxygen. And what we hope to show in the trial is that we can have been able to prevent that progression from being able to breathe on room air or just requiring oxygen, and prevent people going onto ventilators or worse, and that we can get people out of hospital quicker when they're on drug. So that reads out in July. The other thing we've concentrated on since that trial was up and running, we then set about trying to dose people earlier in the course of the infection to try and prevent it even getting to the chest, prevent them, get them before they've become so ill they've been admitted to hospital. So the first thing is that we're targeting people who are at risk, and there's enough data now to clearly see that if you're older, you're at risk, or if you've got certain other comorbidities or medical conditions, then you're at risk. So people with diabetes, for example, or a chronic lung disease, who are over the age of 50. So those are the people we're targeting. We want to get the drug to them. We want to make sure they've got a virus. And especially back in March and April, we didn't want people to be traveling from their home to a hospital, to a research site, because they could be spreading the virus, or if they haven't got the virus, by the time they've left the testing site, they might very well have it. Well, things have improved a lot now. But the first step was that we set up our own sort of courier service where we took a swab to people's houses. We brought the swab back to our labs and tested the virus, and if they were positive, then we would start dosing. So the patient hasn't had to leave their house so far. And if they were positive, then we would ship the trial equipment, which was the drug, the delivery device, other equipment such as a pulse oximeter and thermometer and sharps bin and all that stuff would get delivered to the patient's house. And all of the visits one might normally do in a clinical trials unit are now being done at home in a virtual way, just like this, using Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever it is. So a doctor or a nurse would conduct every visit and supervise the administration of the drug. So that's a neat trial setup. There isn't so much virus kicking about now, so we had to expand the trial from just around the Southampton area to go national, and that was announced last week. So what we're happy about is, what we're delighted about, is that the ability for the NHS to test for viruses improved dramatically, both in terms of the number of tests that can be done and also the speed with which people can get results. So it's no longer taking 3 or 4 days to get results. You're getting results sometimes, well, often in less than 24 hours. So anyone who comes up with a positive test for virus, who's in our target group, who is eligible for the trial, we will welcome them into the trial and ship the drug and everything they need to their house and do all the visits remotely.
It seems to me that you've got two different sorts of patients here. The home ones are the people that presumably are in a better form of health in any event. So presumably expecting some sort of different results from each of those. Are you seeing potentially more a higher success rate of your drug in those home trials because people aren't so dreadfully ill and therefore more difficult to get a successful result for the people in hospital?
So they are different groups of people. You're absolutely right. The it's the one and the same trial, and the endpoints. Some of the endpoints are common to both the patients in hospital and the patients at home. So one of the endpoints, for example, assesses the intensity of the care they need. So you sort of go up an 8-point scale from needing nothing to mildly affected to severely affected at home to being in hospital, not on oxygen, hospital on oxygen, and so on. So we measure people's movement up and down that scale, and you can be on that scale at home or in the hospital. So that's one of the endpoints of great interest. And the other one of great interest is breathlessness, because it's essentially the breathlessness which drives people's concern and drives them to call 111 or 999 and get admitted to hospital. So their movement up and down the scale is of interest to us. And in the home environment, we're trying to treat them and prevent them from getting to hospital. When they're in hospital, we want to try and get them out sooner.
So both those results, both the home and the hospital results, out at the same time in July?
No, the hospital results, that's all fully recruited, and that will read out in July. The home treatment will go at a different pace and is very dependent on the circulating virus. As I said earlier, there's very little virus in the Southampton area at the moment, but we are seeing clusters emerge around the UK. You know, there's a cluster around Holyhead, Anglesey, and there've been other sort of little clusters, and you know, where they emerge, we'd hope that if people are in our target groups and if they're interested in taking part in research, then they'll visit the trial site, which is www.covidtrialathome.com.
Okay, well, we hope that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, we hope that that continues with strength and success as well. Let's steer away from the trials and take a little bit of a look at the shareholding. Neil Woodford, I think, in his fund that unfortunately did not particularly well. I think Synairgen was about 6th largest. I think he was holding in that fund, so he had a fair bit of it. And my understanding is that Link now has taken on that fund holding, and they've already sold down some of that. My understanding is. Are you speaking to Link? What's your association with that shareholding?
Well, Link were kind of like temporary custodians of that shareholding in the way I see it. So you're right, Woodford had at the peak about 20% of Synairgen. It wasn't the largest shareholding in terms of value in his fund, because we're a relatively small company, and he had stakes in some very large companies. So Link were looking after that investment, and they had publicly stated they were bundling up some of the private companies and some of the less liquid companies, of which we were one, and we're looking to place those as a group of companies with another entity. And Acacia acquired that group of companies, and they have slightly reduced their stake in Synairgen, so they sold some of the shares, but it appears that they've steadied. It doesn't look like they're selling anymore at the moment, but that's for them to comment on at some stage, maybe.
Yeah, just a quick, I think your website says Acacia Research now has 12.6%. Lansdowne Partners, I know, is also a large shareholder. It's 11%. Leonard Licht at 6.5%. They're the shareholders in the company that are noted on the website. Let me just quickly take a look as well at where you are in terms of your balance sheets, cash burn and so forth, because I think this is clearly something else. And your proposals, should you need to be raising money. First of all, the cash element. What is the situation with regard to the strength of the balance sheet?
Yeah, so we were funded. So back in January, if you'd looked at us, we had sufficient funds to complete a trial that we were doing in COPD with SNG001. And obviously, when the coronavirus emerged, the trials we envisaged there needed additional funding. So we did a placing a couple of months ago, and we raised £14 million. And that's sufficient money to conduct the hospital clinical trial, which we finished recruiting for, as I said, results from it in July, to do the home trial, which we've also talked about, And the other element is that we needed to invest in the supply chain, because what we don't want to be in a position is producing positive data and then having no stocks of drug to be able to help people and to conduct further clinical trials. So we've invested in that so that we can continue our activity throughout the summer and autumn. And if we get really good data, and if the agencies like the overall package, then we could be in a position to supply millions of doses later this year. So we need to be continually investing in that, and the activity there started several weeks ago.
And you're fully cashed up, do you think, for that? Obviously, it's an unknown quantity in terms of what you're going to spend, depending on the demand. But do you envisage having to raise any more after this post-year fundraising of 14 million?
I won't say no to that, or I can't say yes either. So we need to see what the data looks like and what the follow-on, how strong it is and what the follow-on activities are. But I think that the most important thing, we're a very event-driven company, and getting this hospital dosed data set in July is going to be such a big event for us. And if you look at the general context of new drugs in development that have produced data, Gilead have reported to have spent about $1 billion developing remdesivir. That hasn't quite been launched commercially yet, but that looks like it's likely to happen over the next few weeks or a couple of months. So we'll be watching that. But there haven't been many other breakthrough therapies, and if we do produce data in this time next month or something like that, then that would be a fantastic milestone for the company.
Do you one final question? We've got to wrap this, unfortunately. Do you see ultimately Synairgen being absorbed by another company? You spoke there about Gilead. I know that there are large pharmaceutical companies that are very acquisitive, certainly small companies with opportunities like this. Do you envisage Synairgen to be a standalone business in the future, or are you looking for some sort of partnership and ultimately some sort of takeover?
So our strategy, has always envisaged some sort of partnership or some sort of transaction with a large pharmaceutical company. We don't have the marketing footprint. We don't have the ability to look after the use of a medicine in a marketplace either. So we'd have to transact with a company that's got that footprint. What we're concentrating on at the moment is taking the risks away. So those risks are development risks. Does the drug work? Is it safe? And removing some of those challenging manufacturing risks as well. So that's well within our capability to solve those things. And each removal of a risk enhances the value of this asset. So we'll concentrate on that. And, we do envisage follow-on clinical trial activity and other activity to prepare for wider use of the drug. But at some stage, we would need to transact with a very large company.
Finally, I'd like, if I can, just to quickly go back to the share price chart, 43.9 pence at the moment. What's your message to shareholders?
Just watch our news. We're a very event-driven company, and we've got two readouts which are in train at the moment. One is the data from the COPD trial, which was started, which was ongoing at the time of the coronavirus outbreak. And the other really big one is the readout on the coronavirus patients in this placebo-controlled trial. And then later in the year, subject to circulating viruses, we'll have the data from the people who have been dosed in the home environment.
Yeah. All power to your elbow, Richard. Thanks indeed for joining us. I'm really pleased to be able to catch up with you. It's been an interesting insight into the business of Synairgen. And we look forward to hearing some more information and, of course, those trial results in July.
Great. Well, thank you for your interest in what we're doing.
OK, Richard, that's great. Thanks so much. Richard Marsden, Chief Executive of Synairgen.